Hello and welcome to The Queer Gaze, a gay movie podcast dedicated to examining queer representation and issues.
We're continuing our theme on HIV and AIDS with our second entry in Origins and Stigma. So today we're talking about John Greyson's Zero Patience. And if you want to hear more of the discussion, including our Chili Pepper Award, because this film features enough nudity that we can talk about it, then you should be supporting The Queer Gaze at patreon.com/thequeergaze.
There you'll also get early access to regular main feed episodes and extra content for every single episode.
And you can follow us on social media at The Queer Gaze.
Hello, Joe. Are you forcing me to watch musicals now?
I am indeed. Canadian musicals, no less.
Yes, from New Queer Cinema.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we feasting our eyes on today?
Okay, so as I mentioned, written and directed by John Greyson, Zero Patience is a 1993 film, and we are focused on an immortal, bigoted, unethical taxidermist named Sir Richard Francis Burton, who is played by John Robinson, and he is doing research on patient Zero, who is never named, so we refer to the character as Zero for the entirety of the film, and he is played by Normand Fauteux, and he is allegedly the gay flight attendant who brought AIDS to North America. So Burton is doing research on him because he wants to include him in a museum showcase about different types of plagues. And he ends up being aided by a slightly unwilling at first and then eventually romantically interested Zero when they come to realize that they have a little bit more in common than they realize. But oh yes, Zero is also a ghost because he died of AIDS. So we've got an immortal and a ghost, and they're trying to make things work, and there's lots of musical numbers in the mix as well.
Yes.
This is interesting, Conrad, because I'm familiar with John Greyson. He is quite a significant figure in Canadian cinema. He makes movies of this ilk. So if you know who he is, not too much about this is that shocking or different, but I'm willing to bet that you have probably not seen any of John Greyson's other films, and I know you hate a musical.
I really do. I feel as though I should hand in my queer card because I hate musicals. Not all of them. There are one or two that I enjoy.
Okay.
But this one in particular does feel very much of the early 90s and of the independent queer media.
Yeah.
So it's, it's a lot. And it's... The thing that I struggled with most about it is it doesn't feel as though it is necessarily, although the director did claim that it does, but it doesn't feel to me as though it invites an audience in. It feels as though you need to be steeped in the context to understand a lot of the references, to understand a lot of the threads that it's commenting on, that it's engaging with. But I wonder if that's just because I feel divorced from it because of the passage of time.
It could be a little bit of that, yeah. I have seen a couple of different reviews, some that are, retrospectives, because this film did gain a certain measure of both notoriety, but I think also, it's a queer canon classic to some people. So there's some retrospective reviews, and then there's also reviews at the time, which were a little bit less generous, we'll say. This was met with mixed reception, but I think part of the necessity to enjoy or even appreciate the film is that you do need to have this dual consciousness, right? So you need to be familiar with some of the musicals that we're referencing because different songs are in homage to different types of musicals. But then you also really need to understand the context of how we were discussing HIV and AIDS in 1993. So I think for our purposes, we'll probably lean a little bit more towards that second latter element, the history side, as opposed to musical stuff, because I'll confess it's also not exactly my forte.
I think that's fair enough. And also this is very early 90s in terms of its musical styling. I read various comparisons to Gilbert and Sullivan with the Pet Shop Boys.
Yes.
Some of it sounded to me very much like REM.
REM, yeah, that's the big one.
Yeah. So again, not necessarily things that I enjoy listening to either. So.
Wow. Pet Shop Boys and REM hater, Conrad. Okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah, 90s music generally is not really my thing. But I did appreciate the verve that the film has. It certainly seems to be more of a polemic than a narrative.
Yep.
Certainly, it seems to lose interest in its characters midway through
Yeah.
and just start sort of, hey, we're going to deal with this topic, and here's a musical number. And now we're going to
Yes.
deal with this topic, and here's a musical number. So I found it more interesting as a prompt for a lot of research. And I learned sort of wide and shallow, but I learned a lot of interesting things. I mean, particularly the history of the main character Zero, or at least the human being that it is based upon, I found fascinating.
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my introduction, the character is never actually named, but this is based on a real life figure. So allegedly, this individual, a flight attendant from Quebec, is named Gaétan Dugois, and he was named in the book and the band played on. And essentially, a lot of people for a certain period of time would say, well, this person is responsible for bringing the disease to North America. And there were accusations, as we hear in the film, that this person was hoary. He slept around, he didn't care that he was giving the disease to other people. And again, I think the way that we talk about HIV and AIDS feels very of the moment in this 1993 text, because one of the things that Burton, who is also a real life person, although he died in the 1800s, what the character does at several points is accuse Zero of being a serial killer because he knowingly infected other folks. And I think for some people, there was this element of wanting to blame somebody, and it just happened to fall on this individual who became immortalized in the book. And then this movie is an attempt to, I'm not going to say clear his name, but to make it obvious that that is ridiculous to blame a single person for the spread of the disease. And of course, it actually ended up going on to be disproven even just a couple of years later.
Yeah, quite so. And in fact, his designation as patient zero was a misunderstanding, not necessarily a typo, but a misreading of the CDC document where he was labeled patient O for out of town, as in
right.
This person is not from this local area, but he participated in a very important study to prove sexual transmission as being one of the most important vectors for the spread of this disease.
Right.
I found that really fascinating, and that was the one part that made it sort of relevant in recent history, is thinking about pandemics.
Yep.
And thinking about the urge to assign blame, which I found mystifying at the beginning of COVID. Like, oh, it's this one particular place in China.
Yeah.
And was it deliberate? Was it not deliberate? And you're sitting there thinking, who gives a It just seems so irrelevant. But the way the director talked about it in an interview I thought was interesting. He said that it makes it manageable in a way, that if you can other it, pin it to one person, separate it from yourself, it makes it something that's easier to comprehend, easier to dismiss, easier to control, easier to distance yourself from. And it's interesting in the film that the African green monkey gets a number where they accuse Zero of doing exactly the same thing to them, scapegoating them, which again, I don't know if the science around that is questionable too. But I thought the layers of the onion that we're peeling away, and why are we trying to assign blame here rather than just trying to help people and stop it?
Yeah, I do think one of the elements that the film is most successful at is unpacking all of the different types of discourse. And I think for that reason alone, it makes it a worthwhile entry in this sub-theme that we're looking at. Because I'll confess, this wasn't a film that I had actually seen. I was aware of it. I knew it. Many people, if they know of it, it's because of certain songs. So there is a singing butthole song, and then there's another song about bathhouse etiquette called If You Drop Your Towel in the Shower. And like, we should note, this movie is a comedy. It's very funny and playful, but it's also very smart and erudite. So even if the musical numbers don't fully work for you, even if, yes, like Conrad, you get a little lost in the character shuffle because it doesn't seem like they're actually as important or paramount to what the film is trying to do, I really do appreciate that the film is taking these big swings and it's trying to meet people where the discourse is at, particularly in 1993, where we were looking for scapegoats, where there was all of this misinformation, where pharmaceutical companies were taking advantage of sick individuals to make profits. And we started to see the rise of something like ACT UP, which we will talk about in a later entry somewhere down the line. But, you know, ACT UP was a activist group that was trying to politicize the disease in a way that actually was beneficial to the people who were living with the condition, be it HIV or full AIDS. But they wanted to make sure that these people were still being treated like human beings and that they weren't just being turned into vectors like Zero.
Yeah, absolutely. And condemned to leading very, very small and isolated lives. Because this film, and yes, we will be able to resurrect the Chili Pepper Award, because this film is quite sex positive for a film about HIV and AIDS. And as I say, quite vibrant in a way that puzzled critics at the time who were thinking, where is the pale, thin figure that coughs ominously in Act 1 and is bedridden in Act 3? Because that is the narrative and the imagery that we understand, and we're not getting it. We're getting this joyful, exuberantly costumed, light on our feet musical numbers, which is not what we're expecting at all. And I love the defiance of it, the changing of the narrative. It's really quite invigorating.
Yeah.
Because going into this particular theme that we're working on, I thought, oh, this is going to be rough.
Yeah, it's a lot of dour, sad texts of people getting skinny, getting lesions, dying, saying goodbye to all of their friends and so on. And yeah, guess what? We're absolutely going to see that in some of these texts. What I find striking is that description, I mean, I think to most people, they're going to immediately think of Philadelphia with Tom Hanks and Antonio Banderas. It comes out the exact same year as this film.
Yes, and Michael Cullen is in both.
Oh, really? Okay.
Quite a famous performer and singer and activist who appears here as Miss HIV.
Oh, okay.
Probably my favorite musical number, where, yes, he is playing a character who is delightfully full of sneering disdain for everyone and everything, but also is the one that lays out the exposition about the reality of the CDC study and that Zero is a hero in many respects. So, yeah, I love that performance. And, yeah, surprised to see Michael Callan cropping up in both shortly before, sadly, we lost him.
Right.
So, yeah, it is very different from all of those narratives, many of which, as we discovered in our first film, were more predicated on, okay, but how are the straight people doing?
Yeah, I mean, is there even a straight person in this narrative? I want to say most are somewhere on the queer spectrum, right?
Well, one assumes that Richard Francis Burton must be, because this movie is also a romance, which I was not expecting at all. I mean, nobody throws a pot, but we do have supernatural ghost and live immortal person romance going on. Towards the third act, it even sort of adopts the rom-com
rhythms,
format, which I was not expecting at all, but I quite enjoyed. And I'm a sucker for this sort of thing. I got sucked into it and therefore found the finale quite touching.
Right? Yeah, you're just like, oh, I suddenly find myself wanting these two to get together, even though it makes no sense.
No, not at all. No, but it was fun to watch.
Yeah, and I will say, like, I don't love this movie. I think you can find it campy or delightful or informative and educational and so on. I think you and I are probably struggling a little bit with feeling like it's something of a time capsule film. You mentioned the new queer wave, and that it feels like it's probably an early version of this, but, you know, this has a bit of a feel of the low budget Greg Araki kind of vibe, right?
Yeah.
Where some of it is DIY, some of it is we're just going to get together and make this fucking movie. But I think the thing that I ended up appreciating so much about the film, I mean, aside from the fact that it just feels very Canadian to me, like this is the kind of Canadian film that I grew up watching, but it also feels like a giant FU to so much of the establishment. Like, fuck you to the government, fuck you to straight people, fuck you to misinformation. And I think I admire it more than I actually like it. I don't really want to revisit it anytime in the near future. But I finished it and I thought some of those songs were catchy. Yeah, I kind of got sucked into the romance, but also I love how much this movie feels like a fuck yeah, queers, get up and do something and stop taking this shit.
Yeah, it even attacks fire with fire in terms of sensationalized melodramatic tabloid journalism, and it just takes that, amps it up and throws it right back at its face, which is quite pleasing. But it's not devoid of nuance. I mean, in particular, I was fascinated by the subplot of George. Is he a French language teacher in a school?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, played by it's either Richardo or Ricardo Keynes Douglas. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, the H is bizarre.
It is. So he has the internal conflict that, yes, he is part of, or participating in ACT UP. He is picketing the big pharmaceutical companies. But he is also taking one of the treatments, one of the drugs that's on offer from the self-same company. So he feels quite conflicted.
Yeah.
And that is the one character who is living with HIV, who is losing his sight as a result of one of the opportunistic infections that was quite common, sadly, and is very frightened of being isolated and alone. And so you do get that aspect in terms of showing some of the gritty realism of what living with this disease is, or was, certainly in the early 90s. But then it kind of gives itself a bit of a happy ending by, well, almost by having one of his school kids who mocked him and made him feel othered in the classroom visits him in the hospital and is supportive. And I didn't buy that.
Yeah, that was the element that felt a little bit too much like an early Frost, the first film that we covered in this section, which is everything's going to be kind of okay, or people are going to come around and they will accept you or recognize your humanity. And I agree with you, it just doesn't feel fully earned here.
No, absolutely doesn't. And it doesn't feel as though the character is given enough time, really. He really does feel tertiary to the main plot, but then everything feels sort of secondary to the exuberant musical numbers and having a good time, which, yeah, I'm not against that. But yeah, I'm not sure it holds together particularly.
I feel sort of the same way. I think if anything, George is the most grounded, realistic character. He feels the most like the person you expect to see in an AIDS drama, right? And I think the movie ends up having to use him in that role, in that capacity, quite frequently, but sometimes it does feel like it's at odds to the rest of the film, which does want to say, we're still giving you lots of information, we're still being very politically active, but also it is a kind of technicolor wonder. You know, like the movie opens with Zero literally performing a kind of water ballet sequence. So that's setting the stage for something pretty grand and not operatic, but very big and theatrical. And unfortunately, George is none of those things. He's quite real and quite sad and tragic.
Yeah. A water ballet with a disco ball.
Of course. I mean, Conrad, it's queer. It's so gay.
It's so fabulous. Yeah. And referencing Scheherazade, because, of course, Richard Francis Burton translated the Arabian Nights and became famous for it and was obsessed with sex and
sexologist, yeah,
and measuring penises wherever he went in his empire.
Maybe it's not so much of a stretch to read him as queer then, is it?
Well, no, I think at the time he did an exhaustive study of, I don't think it was bathhouses, but it was something along those lines. You think, well, You were frequenting them a lot. How did you get some of this detail, Dick?
Yeah, your name is Dick, after all.
Well, quite.
All right, well, why don't we leave it there so that we can talk a little bit more specifically about some of these songs. Maybe if you have other favorites. There's a character I also want to talk a little bit more about in detail and so on. But I think we're going to save some of that, as well as, yes, the dicks for Patreon. So, folks, we're going to tell you where we're going to go next if you can't support the show. So we're actually going to look at this exact same character. So we're going to look at Patient Zero once again, but we're going to look at the far more, I think, serious and probably melodramatic interpretation, because it's an American film, also from 1993, called And the Band Played On. So that's where we're going to be in 2 weeks. But if you want to hear more of our discussion about Zero Patients, you can join us on Patreon. It's patreon.com/thequeergaze. And yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. You can also send us an email at thequeergazeshow@gmail.com, or you can find us on socials at thequeergaze. But until then, act up.
Yeah, pop a boner.